Welcome to the Data Sharks, everybody. Super excited to have Tejas Manohar on with us. Did I pronounce your last name right?
It's Manohar, but
Manohar.
that's pretty close.
Close. All right. Now, I appreciate you jumping on with us. So Tejas is the CEO and co-founder of Hightouch. Hightouch is a super interesting organization, company that deals in the reverse ETL market, which was a new one for me, and that's why I'm super interested in talking with you. So tell us first a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into Hightouch a little.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jared and Arcady. So I'm one of the founders of Hightouch. Before founding the company, I was a software engineer. I was actually an early engineer at this company called Segment, which sold to Twilio for a few $1 billion a couple of years ago. And basically, Segment was actually one of the first companies in this space that's now called the Customer Data Platform space, or CDP, which essentially tried to help companies like consumer companies, B2B companies, et cetera, consolidate all their customer data into one place, build models of what it means to be a user and all these sort of things, and then sync it out to a bunch of different kind of systems around the company, whether it's sales or marketing or other solutions around the company. And it'll be super interesting to link that background into what we're working on at Hightouch now. Is a lot of people think of Hightouch as turning their data warehouse into a CDP.
So let's talk about Hightouch for just a second. Tell us what Hightouch is, and a good way to tell us what it is to tell us what the world looks like without it. Like, and that way we can kind of bridge the problem to what solution it solves.
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of crazy to think, but even with technology going crazy, people working on self-driving cars and stuff like that, in most companies, we still see a lot of really primitive processes when it comes to how business teams deal with data, especially customer data. So kind of what we see as the status quo, especially when we go talk to a large enterprise, like let's say Warner Music Group, who's now a customer of Hightouch, but when we talked to them pre-Hightouch, what we saw in terms of how their marketing teams were actually like using data to select which users they're going to send these personalized campaigns to is just a bunch of kind of CSVs and floating around from one BI system like a Tableau into being uploaded manually into another system like a Salesforce Marketing Cloud, or asking someone on the data team for a CSV of users that match this condition or that condition. And it's crazy to think that with all this sort of technology innovation that's happened over the last couple of decades, that's still the state of the world when it comes to how business teams like marketing, sales, finance, et cetera, actually request data from kind of data around a business. So what Hightouch really aims to do is to make it so that if any business user around a company needs to use data for kind of a live automated process, like let's say they want to kick off a personalized email campaign or ad campaign to a bunch of their users that match certain criteria, or let's say on the sales team, they want an alert anytime a certain customer in the sales process, invites n amount of people into an online application. Whenever these business teams want to access data in this kind of live automated way, we want to provide them an easy interface to do so directly on top of the data warehouse that companies have already been building. So on top of all the data that exists in a company's data warehouse, like a Snowflake or BigQuery, et cetera. So they don't have to be like sending emails around asking people for data every day or every week, or asking engineers to write these one-off scripts to send data to the systems they need on kind of on a schedule, like every day.
So if you have like a process that you're trying to run and it needs to be data dependent, you'd get into Hightouch, define what the rules are, and then have it executed as a query out of the systems that have already been conformed, like your data warehouse and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of state of the art for using data warehouses like Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, et cetera today is really BI, which are these reporting tools.
Right.
People can, put a SQL query into a reporting tool and answer a question. They can plot this data over a graph. They can see a table. They can kind of view it in different ways, which is great for things like, powering a presentation or a board meeting or answering questions ad hoc. But when it comes to actually taking that data and actioning on it to create some sort of automated process to power marketing, sales, finance initiatives, your product application, that's when the way every organization actually solves that is completely different and a lot of times super archaic. And what Hightouch aims to do is create a platform where kind of business teams and operations teams around the company can just tap directly into the data warehouse and build automation off of it so that they can use that customer data for their team's purpose. So for marketing, that's often personalizing kind of campaigns that are going out to customers. For sales, that might be better targeting prospects or knowing more about a customer before talking to them by having that information in their CRM. For finance, that might be automating kind of the process of getting all the financial data from each team so that you can close the books out faster at the end of the month. But overall, the goal is to move from a pattern where teams have to ask for data and move to a world where they can just say, I want data to show up in this place at this time, and it automatically goes over from the data warehouse.
Yeah, when you think about it, the people that are asking for data, often what they're doing is they're taking the data to manipulate a fairly consistent process that could completely be automated. I mean, does the way it look as a series of triggers and rules? Is that how it kind of behaves? Where if this happens, then I'm going to execute X, Y, and Z?
So actually, that's how some of our integrations look. But what we find is that every business team uses kind of a number of SaaS tools. So sales teams often live out of Salesforce. Marketing teams often live out of, if you're on the acquisition side, maybe ad platforms. If you're more on the lifecycle marketing side, maybe a email platform like a Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Braze or Iterable or Marketo. And finance teams live out of their system like NetSuite. But all these systems, they have tons of robust features that you can do with data, like this workflow automation or these triggers or this ML or whatever it is. But those features are not really valuable without actually having the right data in the system in the first place. And what we find is that companies are starting to consolidate kind of all their data and build a source of truth in their data warehouse, like a Snowflake or Google BigQuery. And it's just that there's no link between the data warehouse and those SaaS tools. Essentially, what Hightouch allows you to do is make the data warehouse almost the database for those SaaS tools. So you just go into our platform and you connect a system like Snowflake, you connect a destination like a Salesforce, and you say, I want this field from Snowflake to show up in this field in Salesforce, this other field to show up in this way, in just however you want it to look in your system like Salesforce. And then we build a sort of automated pipe in the back end, like automatically, that gets the data into that system and does all the heavy lifting to make that process super efficient and super easy. But really the idea behind our tool versus like the concept behind our tool versus other, data integration, automation systems, it's that with Hightouch, you just say what you want to happen. So you say, I want these fields in Snowflake to show up in this fields in Salesforce, and we'll make it happen versus in other tools, you have to you're almost like coding. You're like, okay, I want to call this Salesforce API and then call this other API and loop over the data. And you're almost like coding, but in a UI. With Hightouch, you're really just saying what you want to happen, and we kind of figure out the how.
Interesting. So is there just a lot of logic you guys have written in the middle, or who's the wizard behind the curtain to like move it over? Because sometimes that coding, I mean, the reason that coding is there is because you've applications are quite persnickety about how data goes in. So what's the wizard part?
Yeah, for sure. So there's no wizardry. It's just code that we're maintaining on our end. But basically what we've found is that, there's a handful of different, a couple dozen different ways that you need to write into these different SaaS systems and cases you need to handle, right? There's, you need to be able to update data in these systems, create it if it doesn't exist, you're able to delete them if the rows are removed. And kind of like there's all these different cases. There's kind of sending data in batch to these systems. There's only sending changes to these systems so that you don't exhaust the kind of limits at how fast you can send data over to the system. So there's all these sort of cases that we've kind of analyzed across hundreds of different SaaS tools so that we can expose an interface to the customer that just lets you say, okay, these fields in something like Snowflake should show up, these fields in Salesforce, and just always be in sync. And then our system kind of figures out the how. I would say like the kind of trend in software that we're riding that I think is underlooked at, like not a lot of people are actually watching this, is that software is becoming more and more declarative. So I think people talk a lot about how programming is becoming easier. It's becoming easier to be a software engineer, et cetera. But people aren't talking about kind of why that is and what's the fundamental trend that's happening in software that's causing that. And I think it's that software is becoming declarative. And you can think of this, a couple dozen years ago, like if you wanted to analyze a big data set, what were you going to do? You're going to have to write a computer program.
Oh yeah.
Go over that large data set.
Scientists back then were paid so much money because it was all hand done.
Yeah, exactly.
JavaScript or Java, and yeah.
Exactly. You're going to loop over that data set. You're going to think about what parts of the operations can you parallelize, what algorithms can you use to efficiently search through this data or join it together. And you're really going to be using your CS knowledge. Now, if you use a system like a cloud data warehouse, like Snowflake, you just dump all the data in there. You give your data warehouse a SQL query, which says what you want to be analyzing the data. It's like, I want this table to be joined with this table, and I want to get an average of this column. And then the data warehouse itself creates a plan of how to do that best. It can say, okay, this table over here is bigger than this other one, so I'm going to apply this optimization, and it creates an actual in database science they call it a query plan, right? And they execute that, and that's exactly how Hightouch works, but for data integration. So instead of writing scripts to get data from one system to another and kind of optimizing it around your use cases, we've basically said there is like the best way to write into Salesforce. There's the best way to write into NetSuite. There's the best way to write into Facebook ads. And that way can be derived based on very characteristics of what you're looking to write. And instead of asking you to code, the exact calls that you're making to one of these systems, we ask you to just tell us what you want to do, create the plan, and execute it on a continuous basis in these systems, just like how a data warehouse makes crunching simpler. Yeah.
It's like the old telephone switchboard. There's the magic behind it is somebody plugs the wire in and says, now we're able to push that data to Facebook, or we're able to push that data into Braze or any of the other platforms. A lot of the work that's been done to date is feeding the warehouse, growing the warehouse, bringing that data in. And traditionally, the only consumption out of the data warehouse has been a BI tool. It's
it's human.
It's objects.
It's a human interface. Yeah,
exactly. And so here, the opportunity is, now that you've collected all of this data, why would you not use it? Why would this not be the place to do it? But I think there's another thing that gets us to this place. So the concept of a customer data platform, as an example, a CDP. It's interesting, as we've seen the evolution of CDPs, and the realization that organizations are having is that CDP creates yet another silo of customer data. Your enterprise data warehouse covers customer data and transactional data and lots of other things.
It's cross-functional, yeah.
Why would you want to build another silo just to deal with customer data? And so I think that's really where the exciting opportunity is you've done all of this work, leverage the data and bring it back so that it's part of your organization, especially because of PII, PHI, and those kinds of constraints as well.
No, 100%. And it's not that the kind of initial idea for a CDP was wrong or silly or anything like that. It's just a different time. When I joined Segment, I was one of the first 10 engineers at the company, and our customers, frankly, didn't have data warehouses that were well formed at that time. We were working with kind of the hottest startups around at that time too, like DoorDash, as it was just blowing up in San Francisco and stuff like that. And these companies didn't have their data story together. Like, they didn't have events about what their customers were doing in a data warehouse. They didn't have their customer data replicating over there. And people were just looking at the latest offerings coming from Amazon, like Redshift, and saying, Segment, like, can you help me use this thing? Like, how do I get data into that? And that was the first problem we needed to solve. At some point, we were, the vendors, like CDPs, were actually like the #1 source of data into systems like Redshift. But the times have changed. The data warehousing market, the enterprise data warehouse market, has exploded much faster than the CDP market and has really set itself over the last 5 years to be, I mean, the standard for how companies consolidate and manage data with breakout IPOs like Snowflake. And with that in mind, now that companies do have this source of truth, it makes sense to activate it versus, create a whole new source of truth from scratch, like the approach that you see in kind of these legacy CDP solutions.
The other thing that's interesting about places like Snowflake, I think Databricks as well, and and as well as each one of these bespoke cloud platforms have their own sort of solutions also. But what we're seeing is these organizations that are moving like to Snowflake, the data warehouse is the end point inside of Snowflake. But prior to that, there's several sort of graduation levels that the data goes through. So there's a lot of points at which you could hook in even prior to the data warehouse, to that endpoint of the data warehouse, that I think would also be interesting in what you guys are doing, because you're really talking to applications, and sometimes the warehouse is sort of aggregated to a certain level, and I think there's opportunities to plug you guys into much earlier stages as well in the pipeline. So a couple of questions that I've got for you. Tell us how it got started. Like, where did Hightouch get started? Why that name? Was it in a garage? Give us those early stages and how you kind of got to where you're at now.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's an insane backstory of the company, to be completely honest.
I love insane backstories.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be really clean to say to the audience that, I just quit my job at Segment and realized the data warehouse was the future of CDP, and here we are with a bunch of great customers. But that's not really kind of what happened. I mean, the perspective that we built, one of my co-founders, our CTO Josh, also comes from Segment as well. The perspective we built at Segment is hugely valuable to what we're working on at Hightouch, and is a big inspiration. But the story wasn't that easy, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Initially, I always knew that I wanted to start a startup. It was something that I'd been eyeing for quite a while. And when I left Segment, I was actually joining as a co-founder to my friend Kashish's startup, which was a B2B travel company. And actually, Kashish is still one of our co-founders today. So there's three of us. Nice. So the story kind of all wraps together. And we went through, the typical Silicon Valley startup stuff. We did the Y Combinator program here. We raised the seed round for the startup. We had some growth going, and then COVID hit. So when COVID hit, we were still an early stage company. We were only a year and a half or so in, and we're all, and this is an interesting learning, we were all consumption-based pricing. So companies paid nothing for our service, like practically nothing for our service. 99% of our revenue came from commissions and usage fees and stuff like that. And when the COVID pandemic hit, there was no B2B travel going on. Businesses were not taking business trips anymore. And
it's like an atomic bomb landing on your startup.
It was night and day. Like, if you look at those graphs, like when the US quarantine started, it just switched off. US was one of the later countries to implement these quarantines compared to travel in other regions. So we had a small drop, but we had a lot of domestic, and it was just night and day for our volume. And
wow.
We waited it out a few weeks. We waited out for a little bit over a month, actually. But at some point we had to make a tough decision. Were we going to continue down the path as a travel company, or are we going to do something else, frankly? And we toyed with a couple ideas of reworking some of the technology we had into a business and travel and different things. But ultimately, we wanted to actually pursue. We had this idea that was floating around, and it just didn't make sense to pursue it while the travel company was going on. But it was actually to build a better customer service tool. So for the travel company, we had built a number of tools to help us do customer service. And at Segment previously, we had actually built some internal tools that often help the customer success team as well. And I would say the big focus across all of these tools was helping these customer success teams and customer service, customer support teams get access to what customers are doing and all the data that companies had about customers. And when I first, created this internal document that I shared with Kashish and some friends and some of our investors about what we were going to be working on, I just called it high touch support idea. And that's actually how the name came about, because in the customer service industry, there's kind of a term called high touch, which is basically means providing a very personal or high touch, kind of experience to your customers versus a very, automated low touch sort of experience. So that's how the whole name high touch got started. And that's how we actually started initially dipping our toes back into kind of the customer data space after our time at Segment. And through the next 6 months or so, we kept exploring this problem of helping support teams and customer success teams see what customers are doing, tap into all the data that companies had about their customer. And as we kind of evolved the product, we realized a few things. One, these customer support and customer success teams didn't want a new tool. They wanted better data and better information about customers in their existing tools. And even though we could provide, new interfaces and the UI and experience that was way better in our own tool, people just wanted it in the tool they already have, because that's much easier to adopt. And there's a lot of great features in those platforms like a Zendesk or a Salesforce Service Cloud or whatever it may be. The other thing is, initially the way High Touch worked, because we wanted to sell into customer support teams and customer success teams, is we actually use one of our partner, Fivetran. We use one of their kind of white labeled offering to pull data from all these different SaaS systems around a company and ETL it into our own database. So customer support team could connect Salesforce and Zendesk and Stripe, and we'll ETL all that into our own database and show that in your systems like Zendesk. And companies started asking us like, oh, for this like revenue field, we've defined a formula in Looker or Tableau already that says, if it's this type of customer, pull it from this system. If it's another type of customer, pull it from another system. And we started to realize like companies were already starting to see the data warehouse as kind of their source of truth and build a source of truth there, not just compile the data there, but start to build SQL formulas that said, this is what it means to be a customer. This is how much a customer is paying. This customer is high value. This customer is not. And there was a huge gap, which was just connecting all that data that companies had in their data warehouse to the live operational processes of not just support, but also marketing, sales, etc. And it was honestly a very incremental pivot to make us realize that we wanted to just narrow down our product to helping those business teams tap into all the data from their data warehouse. And we decided to keep the name because we really liked it.
Yeah, it's a good name.
Good story. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Very
great.
interesting. So it really was this sort of the evolution of COVID pushing you to the edge, and then having you kind of refocus back into customer, but then seeing the customer, this gap there is between usage of content and execution of processes.
Yeah, exactly. The support leaders, would, go open Tableau or talk to the data team to figure out the efficiency of their support team, or are they prioritizing certain requests enough? Are they responding fast enough? But when it came to actually, putting that data to action to help the support team prioritize better or respond better, it was all manual processes like CSVs or internal ad hoc scripts written by these companies. And sometimes customer data platforms, but most oftentimes the customer data platform didn't have all the data the company needed. So yeah, honestly, it took us longer than it should have to realize this is the solution we need to go after, and a big problem because of our bias from working on the CDP space before. But at some point, it just became too clear that there was a new market and new opportunity here around data warehouses.
So what were some of the things that, what were some of your early wins as you started doing this that kind of got you saying, yeah, this is working?
Yeah. So honestly, pivoting a startup, especially, during COVID, after you shut down your travel company and a number of losses, is grueling, right? So you start off when you first quit your job to work on a startup, you want to make this great thing, you want to expand into having, one day be a great company and have like a Salesforce tower and all these things that you see downtown in San Francisco. But after you take that many slaps in the face, I mean, you're really just looking for anything that customers will pay you for at a certain point. They're like, I just need revenue. I lost all my revenue as a business. We have nothing.
Yep.
We just need someone to pay us for something again. And we threw away that grand vision of the customer support tool and said, yes, we will just pipe your data from Snowflake into the systems you want and do whatever you will pay us for as a company. And honestly, we started incrementally picking up customers this way. But at some point, I looked back at our first 3 customers at Hightouch that we got from very different ways: an online data community, a LinkedIn post, my network, just very different ways. And there are 3 entirely different industries. One was a healthcare company in the kind of a consumer branded healthcare. One was a local newspaper in Europe. And the other one was a SaaS company here in San Francisco that I had, a lot of industry connections at. And they were all doing the same thing. They were taking data from their data warehouse. They all had a data warehouse. And they were moving it to kind of marketing systems around their company to be able to then execute personalized campaigns to say, email users who dropped off at this step, or email all my customers that are paying me over this amount, where all those sort of data fields exist in the data warehouse. And we move them to the marketing tool, like HubSpot or like Iterable. And when I looked back and I realized these companies are totally different. Like these companies are literally on, opposite sides of the world, completely different types of individuals buying our software, completely different types of businesses altogether, but they all have the same problem. They're all trying to move data from their data warehouse to these operational SaaS solutions. I realized there's no way this market isn't massive. I was like, if these companies are on totally opposite ends of the spectrum and have the same problem, we need to be serving every company with a data warehouse. And this is like an immense opportunity that we really need to slam the fuel on, because we can go into SaaS and, build a book of business there. We can go into media and build a book of business there. We can go into D2C companies and build a book of business there. Right. And that's exactly what we did. So we decided to raise another round for Hightouch kind of after realizing this trend in our first 5 customers. And in 2021, we really hit the fuel and kind of went from just having 5 customers to over 200 on sort of, annual SaaS contracts in just a year.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. And I think, again, that's the realization. Data is horizontal. And so it doesn't matter if you're a SaaS company, if you're a B2B, if you're a B2C, all organizations have data. And we find it kind of amazing because, a lot of times customers will say, what experience do you have in this vertical or this vertical? And again, analytics is analytics. You learn certainly from different industries, and there's certain things that you adopt to, but data sort of cuts across and standardizes everybody.
And totally. And go for it, Jared. Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
What I was just going to add is that all data is customer data too. Like, data is data across companies, but also all data is customer data. I think what you see in a lot of these CDP solutions is support your shopping data in this way, support your page view data in this way. Yeah. And then we talk to a company at Hightouch and they're like, do you support IoT data? We're a washing machine brand. We actually have a washing machine brand on Hightouch. Do you support IoT data? And we're like, of course we support IoT data. Like, can you pull up your IoT devices in a SQL query? And do you have an object in your Salesforce Marketing Cloud that you want to write them to? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, well, then we support IoT data. We support all data. And I think that abstraction of just like actually reducing the abstractions in CDP. So CDPs have all these sort of abstractions around every type of data a company would need, but often your company's data doesn't quite fit into those. But actually, cutting back the abstractions and instead giving a little bit more generic tool to companies has been one of our biggest wins in the way we've designed Hightouch.
Yeah, I do get a kick out of people asking questions like that. Like, does do you guys have experience in the healthcare space? And I'm like, a dimension, a measure, it's all SQL. Guys, yes, we do. I mean,
there is value in knowing the process. There is value in understanding sort of the nomenclature, the specific things that are unique to that industry. There's certainly value in doing that. But again, the value proposition here is, what Hightouch does is make sure that the data that is owned by that organization is still owned by that organization. that data doesn't leave the organization. And so that creates a completely different conversation versus, give me all the data, I will have it in my own infrastructure, and you'll pay for your own data again. That's the big departure in terms of the silos versus the horizontal solutions.
Yeah, that's massive. And to give you another example of that, like we've moved a lot of workflows at a large consumer company away from sort of a typical CDP they were using prior to the high touch approach of turning their data warehouse into a CDP. And what this company, and I won't name names, told us is that they're like, can I query my events from a few years ago in Hightouch without paying you guys a lot more? And I was like, yeah, you can query any data in Hightouch because the query runs on your data warehouse. We don't charge you for how much data you scan in there. We only charge you for the amount of data you actually need to send to your tool, because that's what actually affects their cost. And that fundamental shift is actually super powerful, because a lot of the ways the old type of solutions like customer data platforms and stuff are architected is, if you query a user from way back, then that user becomes active, and now your active user count's going through the roof, and that doesn't actually mirror the costs that of a data warehouse. That measure just doesn't mirror the cost of the data warehouse. And by moving instead to charging customers on how many users they have to how much they actually want to do in the platform, a consumption-based billing model, that's been a huge advantage in being able to incrementally tack on more and more use cases at companies.
Have you ever
in the old days, we would have a conversation to onboard to Hightouch. These are the servers you need to buy. This is the backup strategy you need to have, and all of those kinds of things. Jared and I talked about this quite a bit on a number of different occasions, where you'd spend the first month to two planning out the infrastructure and architecture. And so CDPs still live in that world where data has to be planned out and provisioned, and elasticity that cloud warehousing provides dramatically changes all that. And I think that's the change. That's the modern approach to how do we manage data. I don't have to think up front, how much data will I have?
Yeah, just the other day, Arcady, you'll appreciate this. We have internally this PowerPoint deck that has evolved over years and years and years. I mean, I joined Intricity 11, 12 years ago, somewhere around that range. And when we first joined, we had this deck that would talk through the process of conforming and consolidating data. And at the very bottom, there was it was a chevron, chevron process that would say, spec out hardware. And then there was this dotted line to the acquisition of the hardware. And it was like towards the end of the entire planning stage, did you actually get some hardware? And it was just,
it's insane.
Oh, it was such a drudgery. And if you didn't get it right, it was handcuffs, and it was just, you had to have it all perfectly defined. So we live in a totally
you have to validate and provide, sort of background why your assumptions are what they are. We don't think about those things anymore. I don't have to think about how much storage I need, how much compute I need.
Yeah, you just try it.
Yeah, exactly.
The presumption, though, Arcady, is you just got the money. Yeah, I got the money, and we'll just. So the one here's just had a conversation with a gentleman about this, and I actually posted it on LinkedIn. But the question is, we've gone from a fixed cost to a variable cost model. The variable cost model is, and because it's a variable cost model, is directly linked to your expertise in architecture and making it as efficient as possible. So you really pay the price if you don't have someone that knows what they're doing on Snowflake. But the opposite is also true. The opposite is also true. If you really know how to use Snowflake, it can be incredibly cheap. You can really frustrate a Snowflake sales rep with a very, very highly efficient Snowflake environment if you know what you're doing. So.
Yeah, and I think even on-prem, the same things apply. If you do things properly, if you architect things properly, you can manage your costs on-prem as well. Knowledge is power, and that I don't think that's it's a variable, or it's a formula that's not going to change anytime soon.
So
For
Tejas,
sure.
one question I have for you
Go for it.
on the high touch. Have there been any moments? There's these moments that I've had over time, and it has to do with different products that we've released and things like that, where I might not express it on my face, but I'm smiling inside just because of the use case examples uh, or the success that the client has had. Have there been some of those moments over this last year where you've just been like, oh my gosh, we're on to something awesome here?
Yeah, I mean, a couple. So last year we onboarded a very large customer that I mentioned earlier, kind of Warner Music Group, huge customer of Snowflake as well. We did some collaboration. They spoke at the Snowflake Media Summit recently, and when we onboarded them to the Hightouch platform, I think what was beautiful is that this company had been and evaluating CDPs for not months, but years before. They've kind of been seeing it here, seeing it there, knowing the problems these tools would solve a big problem for their organization, but not yet being willing to take the jump just due to the amount of effort and resourcing that a project like that would require them to set aside. But what they had prioritized is the data warehouse initiative, and their data was impeccable and massive in Snowflake at this point. Huge customer of Snowflake. And when we finally convinced them to give Hightouch a try, which was a long process, don't mind me, after evaluating CDPs
leaping of faith. Yeah.
When we convinced them to take that leap of faith, a couple weeks later, we looked back at, kind of the reports on our end and synced up with the customer with, our biweekly check-in and stuff like that. And within 2 weeks, they had 200 syncs going on in Hightouch from different SQL queries, and we have to use our visual kind of audience builder to marketing systems around the company, and like 200 syncs, like over 5 platforms, and I was just like, wow, like this is just another scale of organization and use case, and I'm not going to lie, we don't have hundreds of customers with 200 syncs each. Like oftentimes 10 or 50 syncs is enough for a customer to get a ton of value in the units we sell into. But like there wasn't a blimp. Like the software just works fine because again, it's all in the cloud. It's all sort of elastic. And that was an amazing feeling. The other thing I think is that just makes me smile is like the random use cases. I think it's awesome. It's great to see a company like Warner Music Group using us for marketing use cases, but I've been seeing companies use data for marketing for the last 6 or 7 years from my days joining Segment. And I think what's really exciting is to see the fringe use cases that I think will become massive kind of top line use cases for us in the long term. Just seeing customers use the product in interesting kind of weird ways that I would have never predicted. So I think the washing machine example I gave earlier is super interesting. We also have Notto, a self-driving car company on the platform. And one of their many use cases for Hightouch is actually syncing these inventory and all the information about their actual like self-driving like car units that are out in the wild, like how many hours they've driven, how many flips they've had, how many I don't know the specific data, but all this sort of information about it into their inventory management system in NetSuite, their ERP system. Right. And that's just like honestly not something that we would have thought was something that a customer would ask for. When we initially founded the company, we were thinking about it from a customer data perspective. In fact, a customer support, customer success type perspective. And what we realized is the data space is just so massive. Like any use case that you're seeing in the BI space, I think there's going to be an operational kind of counterpart where companies are looking to activate their data via a platform like Hightouch for that same use case, so that they can take those learnings and just put it to action. We've discussed even supply chain use cases and just use cases that I didn't even have knowledge of before founding the company. And I think that's super exciting, personally.
Yeah, the power of having flexibility in what use case it can be, it changes the paradigm quite a bit. I mean, I like to call. There's a video I'm releasing at in about a month. Where we talk about CDP, and I talked about CDP as a category killer in the form of customer data category killer, kind of the way retail would be a category killer for a certain topic. And the thing is, customer is, yes, it's a very active domain in the world of data, but it's just one of so many domains. And the reason that CDP has gotten so much attention is because there's all these organizations sort of building functionality around it. But that functionality is mostly, like the type of stuff you're talking about, which is, hey, I want to be able to link this to this, or I want to be able to create some kind of event that occurs. So to have it be flexible and not be tightly coupled to a single use case I think is a really powerful concept.
Yeah, totally agree. I think, go for it, Arcady.
Please.
What I was going to say is I think, CDPs paint this vision of, get your data into our system and we'll send it out and we'll build this like great source of truth here. But we often see that the implementation of the CDP is super tied to those use cases. So they're like, oh shoot, I don't have this data point. Let me add an event to send it to a system like Segment so that I can send it from Segment to another system on the other end. But when you start thinking about what companies are doing in the data warehouse, it's just a different approach. They're like, let's get all the data in there. So we can query it in any which way we want, model it in any which way we want. And building on top of that foundation where everything's already there, because the analytical queries need to, cover all use cases. And telling companies, look, like time to value, like just no need to pull in engineers, just start activating the data you have already in the warehouse. You need to collect it in a different way is just super, super impactful for us.
Yeah, and it really does live up to the Intricity logo. It simplifies complexity. I mean, it makes things so much easier to be able to deliver results. I mean, you can get up and running in days versus, building a silo implementation, moving the data, extracting the data, dealing with all those things. But quality of data is important, and also the identity resolution side. So you talked about use cases, you expected use cases that perhaps exceeded expectations. We have the same thing on the identity resolution side, where we start with householding and making sure that we've got the right customer, the customer. But there are use cases in GDPR, there are use cases in CDPA. There's lots of things that before you get to activate, you want to make sure that you have the right to activate. And so there's a lot of interesting things that we are doing together that will help customers make sure that right data is getting into the activation funnel.
100%. Yeah, I think I sort of had a tweet about this a while back where I basically said data modeling, data transformation, data cleaning is the only thing that like companies should be focused on. Like the rest of it should be handled by tooling out of the market. And it's true. I mean, companies need to be able to think thoughtfully about how to do things like identity resolution, data transformation, consent management, regarding like all the problems and kind of different aspects of the business that they face, what regions they're in, what applications they own, what companies they're buying that have other customer data they need to integrate. And that's where like a partner like Intricity becomes so valuable to help the company through this sort of process that's super complicated. But without good data in the warehouse first, and without a good understanding of what is the customer, what is one of these entities in the warehouse, activating that data is pointless. And it's definitely still a big challenge for companies today.
Do you see that question come up a lot, where it's like, they might not think about, because it's pretty common for people to kind of pass on data quality or mastering data until they are really faced with a problem that has to deal with it. Like, do you find people going, okay, now we have to deal with this data quality problem because now we're feeding it back into the application?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that's like the most common thing we run into, but that's definitely something that we have come across a few times, or it's the other way around. It's like, oh shoot, now that we've built this like great record of data in the data warehouse, we don't have this great record of data in the data warehouse in that place the script that we wrote is pulling customer data from. Maybe we should pivot this process we're doing internally of the company to pull from the data warehouse instead. And then kind of the data team and the IT team's like, the data warehouse has good data now because we partnered with someone like Intricity, but because we invested in DBT there, and then like now let's turn into the source of truth. So it depends on which angle we're coming from. Sometimes we're coming from the like business team angle, like marketing has a problem. Then they're like, shoot, we need to do a bit data transformation, data cleanup before we can solve this problem with Hightouch. which is still easier than investing in a whole other solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if it's from the data team, sometimes it's the opposite, where like cleaning up data is now a trigger. Like now we can actually do something with it. Like, let's implement some more processes off this instead. Yeah.
So when you're onboarding a new target application type, like, so let's say that I'm going to choose an extreme and just say you were going to connect to SAP, which is definitely an extreme. So, what is it like to connect to one of these new systems? Because that's a lot. There's a lot of command types and a lot of things that you just need to prep for. Is it a major event for you guys to go and add a new target, or are you guys kind of focused on, all right, these are the sort of core set of commands that we're going to really focus on into target applications?
No, it's a great question. We build all our integrations with these various systems in-house, and we build them in a way where when we get one of these on the market, all our customers can use it. We have a self-service platform people can sign up for it. If we have a Salesforce connector, 10 of our customers using it, the other 100 can use it. But in onboarding these new connectors, there's no silver bullets in the end of the day. When it comes to like how to write data into a system like SAP, it's entirely different than how to write data into a system like Salesforce. There are patterns around how you might handle different types of errors, or how we might have the infrastructure to get batches of data off something like Snowflake, but actually calling the commands in the SAP and in the Snowflake, it's entirely just two different systems and two different types of processes. And that's why companies pay us a lot of money. But we've kind of built out the organization needed to be able to build a lot of these connectors. So if you look at things like our changelog, every week we're releasing a few new connectors, and we have a team of over a dozen folks just like kind of working on maintaining and building connectors at our company, and taking those learnings so that they can build better connectors, build a better framework and abstraction with how we do write to these systems, build a better platform that kind of cascades and has effects on all the connectors. But it is a process where we have to really learn the intricacies of the system, because oftentimes these SaaS tools, it's not like a database like Snowflake or like Postgres that's super well documented online. There's a bunch of reading on. The systems are kind of archaic and work in intriguing ways, and sometimes we have to talk to that company to figure out, why are we seeing this is way slower than this? And they'll be like, oh, let me explain to you how it works. And honestly, with some of the systems we integrate with, we've gotten to the point where I think we really understand how their infrastructure works on their end. Like we've talked to partners, and they're like, this route is going to be slow because each time you call this endpoint, we do this in DynamoDB or something like that. And our engineers understand it like to that level.
And the nice part is you can get them to play ball with you. It'd be one thing because they know that you're putting data into their platform.
Yeah, we're talking to one of our partners later today about being the first one to use a new API that they're releasing, right? Nice. And that sort of thing happens when you're just powering, not just when you're not just one customer using the service, but you can tell them about trends you're seeing across many customers. I think a great example of this is Braze, right? So we integrate with a system like Braze. It's a great marketing tool that a lot of large enterprises are moving to, and they recently went public in the last 6 months. And something in their API that sticks out to me and just comes top of mind. Every tool we work with has quirks, for what it's worth, not just Braze. But one thing in their API is that you need to send when you're sending updates to the user profile in Braze. If you send all 100 columns about a user that you have, all 100 attributes, it will consume like 100 data points in the system. And data points is kind of their like consumption metric. It's like kind of like their API calls. And there's like a limit on how many data points you can consume and stuff like that. And so we implemented something for Braze where in our platform to make it easier to connect to Braze, where previously we would just kind of create these deltas saying this row changed, that row changed, and then only send the changed rows to the system like Braze or Salesforce each time. We changed it so that it actually only sends the changed columns to Braze or Salesforce or whatever system at every time, so that companies can conserve data points. And we've never met a company that has built a script from
something like
any system to Braze that only sends the changed columns. Like I've never met a company that's done that in-house, but doing that for a company like Hightouch makes total sense because it doesn't just
you're pushing all the time.
Benefits a lot of the systems we're working with, and honestly saves on network costs for us too, because we're sending way less data over the wire at the scale that we're at. So
Do you when you're doing demos to clients, or is there a specific feature that they're just like, oh my gosh, all right, we're getting this?
Yeah, yeah. I think the one that really stands out to like all our clients is the debugger. So the idea behind the debugger is that when a sync's running in Hightouch, you can see exactly what's happening inside the Hightouch platform. So you can actually see all the requests that are going to like the downstream system, like Salesforce, like the HTTP requests, where we like kind of pretty them up for some systems, like Salesforce, where it's like SOAP APIs and stuff. But you can see exactly what Hightouch is sending to Salesforce, like after it's transformed it to be in the Salesforce kind of format. You can see all like the kind of batches of rows that are going to there. You can search for individual rows. You can see failed ones, how many times they're retried, what the error is. And you basically just like, even though we are sort of a black box in terms of, we don't make you call it the APIs, you can see exactly what's happening under the hood. It's super powerful for customers. And the coolest part about the architecture of the debugger, I think, is that it taps into what we call our hybrid architecture of Hightouch, which means all the data that we need to store to power the Hightouch app, like what was last synced to Salesforce and stuff, is all in your data warehouse and an S3 or Google Cloud bucket that you can like provide us as a customer and your bucket. So you basically provide us one of these buckets, which is almost like a Dropbox folder or Google Drive folder inside of these cloud environments. And we store all the customer data that's going through our system in that bucket. So that's not actually stored on our end, which is great for compliance when you think about GDPR or HIPAA or CCPA. And on our end, we actually have our own infrastructure and different systems like DynamoDB and stuff like that just indexes, okay, this batch of data has an error, go look at this S3 file to get it. We don't actually store any of the data on our end.
You have pointers rather than the data.
Yeah. And so the customer, like every single demo of Hightouch, we show the live debugger, like it's sync with a million rows, you can see it go 10K rows, 10K rows, 10K rows. And in your screen, you can see like the actual, like, if you have an admin, right, you can see the customer
transfer
data flowing, but you can't, it's not actually stored in Hightouch. And they're like, how do you do that without storage? Architecture. They're like, that's sweet. Like that's a feature that really resonates with companies, because they're like, well, if you don't store data, like how am I going to get the visibility I need? I need to know the logs. It's like, oh, we can store those logs on your end too. And it's just like, frankly, not something I've seen in any SaaS tool unless it's like on-prem. Like I've never seen it in a cloud SaaS tool, this model of like, storing all the data in your own infrastructure. But I do think it's something that more companies are going to do.
Very cool. So what are some of the features that are coming in the future that you're excited for, to put out there?
Yeah, for sure. So actually, earlier you mentioned that there's opportunity to not just tap into the data warehouse, the kind of the destination of data, but sometimes there's opportunity to tap into systems earlier in the pipeline. And that's something we're actually thinking about super heavily at Hightouch. So one thing we believe is that, and the reason we're doing this actually is a little bit different than the reason you mentioned. The reason we're looking at this is actually latency reasons. So for a majority of use cases, it's totally fine to happen in batch. That's just the reality of it. Like everyone's looking for real time, but when we talk to a lot of these companies, both startups and enterprises, real time is just automated sync that happens every minute. Like that's real time enough. It doesn't have to be like actually like in a second. But there are or 5 minutes or 10 minutes or even an hour in some of these companies. But there are certain use cases. So 90% of use cases are fine off the data warehouse and a SQL query and kind of this little bit slower way. But there are certain use cases that need to be a bit instantaneous. Like let's say let's say I'm Starbucks and I'm a customer going through the checkout aisle and I buy something and I want a notification in my Starbucks app. And then let's twist that a bit and say that I want that notification to be tailored to me as a customer. If I'm a Starbucks member, it's a certain thing. And if I'm not, it's a certain thing. And that information, let's say it's in the data warehouse or in one of these data systems. Like the data warehouse is a bit slow to serve those sort of use cases when you actually want that immediate push, that immediate reaction. But often companies have these events flowing in a real-time queue, like a Kafka queue or Kinesis or Google PubSub. And we at Hightouch have a beta going on right now. We're working on actually allowing companies to not just tap into data warehouses and pull that customer 360 and ship it to different SaaS tools, but to also just say I have a few live data points that I want to be able to map to like events kind of in a SaaS tool off of a queue like Kafka, Kinesis, Webflow, you kind of name it. And we expect that to almost fill the last mile of that like 5% use cases that need to be real time, and super excited about that because we just want to help companies with activating data, kind of no matter where it is, data warehouse, the queue, whatever it is. We just want to help them like get more value from it.
So what's the best way for people to reach Hightouch?
Yeah, for sure. So best way to reach Hightouch is just going to the website, hightouch.io. So it's like the word high, the word touch.io. And you can sign up if you want to just play around. Every account comes with a demo database. You can also schedule a demo like right on the website. And then the last thing you can do is you can email hello@hightouch.io. So just the word hello@hightouch.io. And someone on our team will get back to you. And I actually look at all the emails in that account once a week as well. So
nice.
if you mentioned the Intricity show, someone will get back to you immediately, but then I'll take a look and send a personal follow-up as well. So would be super excited to talk to more folks who are watching the live stream and toss around ideas, even if you're not looking to purchase Hightouch today. Like I think just tossing around ideas and talking about industry and talking about different challenges is always super exciting to me in particular.
Yeah, Tejas, this was a really, really interesting interview. It's a new space for me for sure, and I think you're onto something. I think this is going to be a really cool endpoint for data out of the data warehouse and out of Snowflake and whatever source systems we're talking about. So I appreciate you joining us, and hightouch.io is the website. And I did a lookup. Tejas is on LinkedIn as well. So, do some outreach, and really great talking with you. And we hope to get a chance to connect with you again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Jared and Arcadia. It's great to be on the show.
All right.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.